Thank you so much, Alicia. Hi, everyone. I'm Wynette. I'm the Children and Youth Program Coordinator here at Redwind Consulting. For those of you who are a little unfamiliar with Redwind, we're a national tribal technical assistance provider working with the Office on Violence Against Women. We offer a variety of trainings and consultations, either on site or one-on-one through emails and phone calls. We can provide assistance for children and youth on topics like domestic violence, teen dating violence, sexual assault, trafficking, and stalking. We can help with things like policies, education, community outreach, and developing or enhancing your services for young victims. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, and this is part of our webinar series on children and youth. If you missed any of the past webinars, most of them are already archived on our website, but the rest will soon be archived as they become available. And our website is red-wind.net. So today's webinar is on engaging teen boys so we can get them involved in positive changes and positive peer pressure. I am very honored to be able to introduce Dawn Chapin as our presenter today. Dawn is the Director and Men's Program Supervisor for Crossroads Nonviolence Education. He's a member of the American Probation and Parole Association and has worked on a number of projects with them since 1999. He's been engaged in facilitating offender programming since 1980 and has been working on violence against women initiatives since 1976. He's a former co-chair of the Governor's Council on Domestic Violence for the state of Oregon and serves on the state's Attorney General's task force to develop standards for batterer re-education programs for the state of Oregon. In 2009, he was appointed by the state's Chief Justice to the Citizens Review Board to assist in reviewing cases for children and out-of-home placements. In 2012, he was appointed to Oregon's Attorney General's Sexual Assault Task Force. And in 2015, he was added to the Domestic Violence Council for Oregon's Department of Human Services. In Minnesota, he was the director of the Division of Indian Work, Family Violence and Sexual Assault Program and Family Services Manager for the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center and was co-coordinator of the Men's Program for Domestic Abuse Intervention and the Safe Haven Supervised Visitation Safe Exchange Program. He helped develop the Counseling for Abusive Males program and worked in the Domestic Abuse Project and was a trainer for the Sexual Violence Center, also in Minnesota. Don is a grandfather of Mohawk and Scottish heritage and has dedicated over 35 years to the safety and autonomy of women, children, and all victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking, with an emphasis and preference of working in, with, and for tribal communities. And with that, I'm going to pass it on over to Don. Thank you, Don.
Thank you both. Bonjour, Anine. Welcome to this webinar for Redwind. I'm honored to be here. Today's topic is about trying to engage teen boys, or some suggestions on engaging teen boys in doing this work. And so I'll be going through the slides with you, and I like to start with this proverb, this Arapaho proverb. When we show respect for other living things, they respond with respect for us. And I think that's one of the things that we're constantly working with teens, with youth, with adults, is trying to raise the level of respect for all. So I'm going to just launch right into this. Please feel free to post any questions. If I don't see them, then the other people that are running the webinar will alert me to them, and I'll try to answer them as we go, or we can, and we'll save some time at the end in case there's more. So let's see if I can make this work. Okay, so historically, the work to end violence against women has been viewed by many as work by and for women. That it used to be, you'd hear a lot about, well, this is a woman's issue, but it occurred to me many years ago that this is not a woman's issue. This is a human issue, and this is an issue where women and children are the predominant victim survivors of this kind of life-altering trauma. And so my work has been focused on trying to engage more men in doing the work, not just holding offenders accountable and trying to re-educate them or restore honor for them, but just trying to get more folks involved in doing the work. So statistics show that men and boys perpetrate the majority of the violence towards women and girls. It does not mean that the majority of men perpetrate violence towards women, although many of us, even if we're not actively involved in acts of violence or aggression, physical or sexual, towards women, that many of us as men or as teen boys still benefit from that kind of behavior that those men who do perpetrate these acts we benefit from it because of simple things like if I want to go to a hotel, if I travel somewhere and want to travel and get to a hotel or a motel late at night and want to take a walk, well, it's pretty simple for me to go out and take a walk and feel relatively safe. With my women colleagues, that's not necessarily the case. And I just want to point out that just being silent on this issue is not being neutral. It's a voice of complicity. So it's important for teen boys, for men to be speaking out, to assist women and girls in our communities, and to better our own lives. Again, when we show respect for others, then we get that kind of respect back. So there's a pretty instant response to the level of respect when we start to act in a way that is more respectful. So if we believe in the work to promote sovereignty for our nations and safety for our communities, then it's important as men that we support safety and autonomy and sovereignty for women. That oftentimes we get into situations where teen boys or adult men will want to say that they're victims as well, and yes, there's many occasions where children and male children and teen boys are also victimized. There's instances where adults are victimized, adult males are victimized as well. But I think it's important for us to consider that if we are the ones that are engaged in doing the work, that we need to be aware that our behavior is a major contributor to this problem. So what can teen boys do to help end violence against young women? They can become involved in community projects. They can be involved in checking their own behavior. And being sure that they're not perpetrating the same kinds of behaviors. We can educate boys and expand so that they can expand their definitions of what is abusive and controlling behaviors. There's been so many times in our communities that we are raised around these issues with a certain amount of tolerance or permission, that the community has a certain level of accepted tolerance for the kinds of behavior. And when young boys and when teens see this, then they grow up with the notion of being entitled to act that way, that they can expect certain benefits from acting that way. And young girls and young women, and adult women, they're being raised with the notions that this is how they can expect to be treated when they get to dating age, you might say. So what we're asking people to consider is that in our communities that we start to promote respect for teens. There's so many times that we just look at teens and think that their behavior is so much different than ours. but they're just responding to the times. They may look and act and talk differently, but really the behaviors that they have aren't much different than the ones that they're modeling. So throughout the presentation, we'll try to come up with, well, we'll talk about some ways in which we can encourage teens to be involved in doing the work. The sad reality is that this tolerance, this acceptance and encouragement of these behaviors, these negative behaviors in many cases, has made the family home the most unsafe place for young women and for anybody who has survived the behavior. You know, we try to think of the safety as an island in our homes, in our communities, but the fact of the matter is that many teen boys who are accepted as being proud members of the community and doing good things in the community, or adult men as well, you know, that there may be good deeds that they're doing, but when they get into dating relationships or interpersonal relationships, then they start modeling what they've witnessed as they were being raised, and they start to act in the same way. And it's based on this kind of entitlement thinking that that's how I'm supposed to be acting, that that's the community norm. Blank here just a second. So 63% of young boys between the ages of 11 and 20 are in prison for homicide, that have been in prison for homicide, have killed the mother's batterer. So this is an example, a really stark example of what happens when teens get involved. They think that the only way that they can assist is by trying to intervene when their mother is getting assaulted. It creates a very dangerous time for them. And you know, I've worked with youth in the past, you know, as young as 9 and 10 years old, and sometimes even younger, where they've attempted to intervene. They end up getting injured themselves, whether it's intentionally or it's being injured when they get in the middle of the argument, when they try to prevent the aggression of the primary aggressor, and who are usually men. And that's why this huge statistic of 63%. It's a sad reality, but it is a reality, and it's something that we can work with in our communities. 40% of homeless women and children have fled violence in the home. So again, we're always looking at people on the side of the road, like, you know, when they have their signs up, like they should just get a job, but you know, really, sometimes they have fled situations that they have feared for their lives, or has been extremely uncomfortable in the home. And it's important for us as community members, to understand that these kinds of numbers are a result of this accepted level of tolerance for the behavior in the first place. When people aren't held accountable for lesser offenses, then they have permission. That goes back to this silence being the voice of complicity, that they have permission to repeat the behaviors. They have permission to engage in the same kind of behaviors that they've grown up around. And there's actually a community from the adults in the community that we look at it like, oh, that's inappropriate teen behavior, but we've taught them that behavior, and it's important for us to have that basic understanding that what kids see in their community is what they're going to model. All right, so a little bit of a lag time on my, okay. So we want to educate young men, and we want them to expand their definitions about what is abusive and controlling behavior. We want to expand their definitions on things like no does not mean yes, no does not mean maybe, that there's not a gray area, that no means no, and that there's lots of times when it comes to inappropriate behavior that if somebody says, I'm uncomfortable with that, it's not about our intention as males about what we're trying to do. It's about their perception, about how they're receiving the information. And so if they've been modeling behavior that they've seen their adults engage in, then it's not as likely that they're going to come up with an alternative unless the community itself is saying, hey, look, we have to look at this issue differently. We have to promote a certain amount of health and respect for all members of our community. That affects, going back to the notion of, what affects one member of the community affects the whole community. So when we start, even with small acts, to educate men about, no, that saying that you're using isn't appropriate, that behavior, that teasing, that tickling, that those are things that are not necessarily wanted by somebody else. And if they say no, or if they indicate they're uncomfortable with it, then it's our job as males to be able to respect that and to back away from that. No doesn't have to be the letters N-O. There can be lots of ways in which young women may be uncomfortable with engaging in the behavior and give us signs and that it's not okay. And so again, we want to educate young men about what those signs might be. Educate men about if we want respect, then we have to show respect. We want to be talking about what are community-based solutions. Every community is slightly different. Some communities already have pretty proactive initiatives in their community to try to stem this issue, but other communities are struggling with things that they can do just to engage youth, and one of the main problems we have is that we don't go to youth in the first place and ask them what might be helpful. We don't include them in decision-making processes along the way that show that we respect their voices. And when we don't do that, then they're not as likely to come forward because it's an uncomfortable situation for them. So we want to encourage them by enlisting and eliciting their thoughts, ideas about what we can do differently while we're educating them that there is a different way, a better way. There is a question here about the sources for the quotes, and we can send that information back out to you or post it back out. So if people want to include their email addresses to me directly, I can respond to them directly, but we'll also make sure that these the notation for where these stats came from will be posted on the website. We're trying to engage youth in being more personally accountable. So if we're talking about the notion of accountability, then we have to expand it to more than just the individual. Right? I myself, as a facilitator of adult and youth programming, I know that I have to be accountable. I have to model the behavior, but I have to be accountable to the women, the children, all victim survivors of the behavior. That my work with primarily males, they are not necessarily the, quote, client. They are the person that I'm engaged with so that we can increase the level of safety and accountability in our community. So we want to be accountable to women, children, and all victim survivors, but we also need to be accountable to ourselves, our family, our extended family, and our close friends. And that in itself, again, with that statement I made earlier about what affects one member of the community affects the whole community, that we also are, I don't know what that noise is. There's some kind of beep happening on my phone. I don't know what it is. I'm going to try doing it this way. Okay, so we want the whole community to be involved in the initiatives. We want to be accountable to the community, but we also want to get a certain response back from the community. So the community is the tribe, it is the local tribe, but it is also those people in our communities who aren't tribal, those people that we interact with on a regular basis, you know, whether it's somebody at a store or at a service station or at the health organizations, any of the community-based organizations, that we want to be accountable to them. And we also need to be accountable to the local society in our system of community justice, however that looks in your community. So we need to expand our definition of what accountability is, but also understand the impact on everyone. That it's not just enough just to say this behavior has to stop. We have to come up with additional ways in which we can expand people's definition of what the behavior is, but also how it impacts. What are the effects of that behavior? When teens are engaged in hearing about how their behavior is affecting other people in the community, that when they do it, if they're respected members of the community and they are acting that way, then it is possible that they're going to feel like other teens are going to want to replicate that. That's the popular person, and yeah, even though they're doing these good deeds, they act this other way in their interpersonal relationships. So if that's what's going on, then they're going to repeat that same behavior. They want that same kind of status and interaction. So if they don't have a different model to follow, then they just end up replicating the same kinds of behaviors, even if it's been directed towards them and they've been victims of the behavior. They still end up feeling like they're not only entitled to that behavior, but it's encouraging. You know, when people are quiet again and not holding people accountable, then the behavior is actually encouraged. So how do we encourage accountability? So one way that we do that is talking about it in terms of restoring honor, that we are as men, as teen boys, and sometimes as teen girls, that we do things, we say things, we act in ways in which we dishonor ourselves, we dishonor our family name, our personal name, we dishonor our family, we dishonor other members of the community, we dishonor our heritage and our culture. And so if we act in those ways, those are actions, and we can take different actions so that we can restore or return to honor. And this is where we could have community events where we can see teens modeling new behavior, where they're trying to educate other teens on the effects of the behavior. The effects aren't always just the physical effects, especially with sexual assault and domestic violence kinds of, or interpersonal violence kinds of issues, that they leave long-standing scars. And sometimes those scars stay with us forever. I mean, I'll be 68 next month. And for me, as an adult male, what I know is that there are still things that I carry around with me from how I was treated as a youth, the physical and sexual violence that I experienced as a youth. Some of those things still stay with me now. And even though those impacted me, I acted in ways, and when I was a teen and as a young adult, I acted in ways in which I replicated some of those same behaviors and again, dishonored my name, my family, my tribe. And so for me, it's about how do we restore that honor. So honor is a thing that has been major in our communities over the years. You know, one of the ways in which we've received honor in the past as
young men, as teens up into adulthood, has been we get great honor by the fierceness of our behavior in battle, let's say, or with an enemy. But nowadays, that energy kind of gets transferred into our relationships, and we're replicating some of the same behaviors that we used to get receive a certain amount of honor for when we're using that behavior directed at the enemy, but now that person that we're directing that negative energy towards are girls and women in our communities. And I've witnessed plenty of teens who have been abusive towards both the teen women that they're dating, but also towards adult women. So they can restore honor by making amends for that behavior, but also doing other things in which they can show that they're trying to honor the community. So I've seen different youth projects where youth who have gotten in trouble have now done things like put up wood for elders, or fix elders' homes, right, or create community events where the whole community can benefit. And so then when we've seen somebody who's had inappropriate behavior, then we see them restoring honor by doing things for the community that makes them feel good personally, but also benefits the community as a whole, and kind of lessens this cloud of ill thoughts that we have sometimes about idle youth and what are they doing when they're hanging around. And it's unfortunate because there's lots of times I've had experiences where people make judgments on people just because they're standing around in groups and maybe they don't look the same as others. So we want to restore safety and autonomy in our families and in our communities. We want to do that by honoring the roles that people have. There are no roles that are more or less important in communities, whether they're traditional male or female roles. These are just roles that we've been assigned over the years, and sometimes those roles are flexible. Men do them, women do them, young women do them, young men do them. So we want there to be a certain amount of safety for that to happen in our communities, and a certain amount of autonomy so that people are free to roam in that way. And if we have done acts that are same or similar to those that we feel have caused us to feel oppressed, or feel like there's a certain amount of internalized oppression or overt oppression towards us, it's important for us to realize that as boys and as men that we can actually look at that list and say, if those behaviors that I've received are inappropriate, why am I replicating those behaviors towards young girls and women in my community? What gives me the right or the entitlement to do that? So that's part of the education process, is just having people look at how behaviors that they have now that they're trying to replicate sometimes mirror those behaviors that were used towards us or used towards other youth in the community, and that it is important for us to realize that there may be alternative ways to do that. So we want to challenge what is acceptable in our communities. When we hear words being used, when we hear phrases being used, when we see treatment of others, that we want to challenge that and have youth gain permission for being able to challenge that and saying that, no, I'm not going to engage in it. No, I don't feel that that's appropriate. And it's not as simple as just saying, well, what if that's your sister, or what if that's your niece, or what if that's your mother, or something like that. It's about having an increased level of respect for everybody in the community, and that the new norm would be that that behavior is not acceptable. So we want to challenge those acceptable behaviors. It doesn't matter if we witnessed other men who are doing good things or other teens who are doing good things in our community. If we only look at what they're doing good and don't look at how that behavior has a negative impact on the community, that unacceptable behavior has a negative impact on the community, then again, we're just letting people off the hook. We're letting them slide, and we're giving them permission to replicate the behavior. So, so we want to encourage things like drum groups and learning the language and being able to stand up for water rights and other things that are happening in our community. We want to encourage youth to be part of that their voices would be heard when we're working on these issues. The future that they have in front of them is basically the present that right now of what we've handed them. We have to take on a responsibility for what we've left youth in the past. So for me, it's always important that we acknowledge that, as adults, we've passed on this world to teens. The teens and youth did not create the world that they're living in. These were created generations before them, and that these community norms, this acceptable level of tolerance for abusive and controlling behavior, has been part of our community. Even though it's been a distasteful part of it, it's been a part of it. So we want to look at, it doesn't matter who the person is, no matter what the good deeds they may also be doing in the community, that we are also looking at what's inappropriate. And I say that because I come from a family where my father was very well respected by community members. He was one of those men who could help fix any kid's bike or any person's car or help them with home repairs. And people in the community held him in very high esteem. And they would say to myself and my brothers that, I was lucky to have a father like that. They would say to our mother that she was lucky to have a partner like that. But the reality is that his behavior behind closed doors was not acceptable. His behavior sometimes in public towards his partner, our mother, and other women was unacceptable. And people would continually kind of let him off the hook for that. And what I would challenge people to think about is, what is it like for a youth or a teen when they want to go to somebody in the community and say, look, there's this inappropriate behavior, physically, emotionally, sexually, intellectually, psychologically, that there's been this inappropriate behavior behind closed doors, and I'm really uncomfortable with it. I'm not safe. I feel threatened, or I'm threatened because my mother has been threatened. Right? That when we just look at the good deeds that people do, that we don't hold them accountable for the offenses, no matter how small the offenses are, that people just get permission to continue that behavior, and it creates this level of unsafety for youth and kids. They don't have people to go to. If I'm not going to go to my neighbor and say, this is the kind of thing I'm experiencing in my home, when that neighbor has told me how lucky I am to have a father like that. If I'm a girl, if I'm a teen girl, a young girl, or I'm not going to, or an adult woman, you're not a young adult woman, you're not going to go to a neighbor who says you're lucky to have a partner like that, and talk about the behavior that's been being perpetrated behind closed doors. So I like this quote by Joe Biden, the vice president. It's an older quote. It's from 1993, but it's still relevant today in 2016. That if the leading newspapers would announce tomorrow a new disease that over the past years has afflicted 3 to 4 million citizens, few would fail to appreciate the seriousness of the illness. Yet when it comes to 3 or 4 million women who are victimized by violence this year, no, it's still, the alarm still rings softly. That there may be situational concern, and there's not concern for the overall issue. So we want to engage youth, we want to engage teens in seeing that there's three basic paths in which they can assist with these issues. There's the old Lakota story about the three sisters who are walking along the riverbank, and they see these babies floating down the river. And many of you I know have probably heard this story. And so the first sister jumps in and is trying to rescue them. She's just taking the kids and throwing them, the babies, and throwing them to the bank and trying to save them, right? And so that's important. You want to try to save somebody who's drowning. And the second sister jumps in a little bit further upriver and is trying to teach these young ones how to swim so that they can save themselves. And that's important as well. Education and skills are important. But we also want them to see that the third sister, when she ran up the river, the other two sisters yelled out to her about, "Where are you going? Why aren't you helping with this problem?" And she said, "I'm going to go up the river and find out how the babies are getting in the river in the first place. Why are they floating down the river? What can I do about changing that?" So that's creating the new social norm. So yes, rescuing somebody who is having a hard time, trying to assist them in that way, that's important, and youth need to know that. And education is important. Learning a new way is important, and youth need to know that. But they also need to know and be engaged in the process of how do you create change in your community? How do you change these norms? What kind of things that are happening systemically that there's a lot of permission for that can be changed so that the babies don't keep floating down the river, so that the levels of violence, whether it's physical or sexual, emotional, psychological, doesn't matter. Those levels of violence, unacceptable behavior, controlling behavior changes. I would welcome any questions, comments, and concerns. It's always awkward for me when I can't see the faces in front of me. So one thing that we can do is ask how teen girls are being treated in the community, in the schools, in the media. And we can ask youth that, we can ask adults that, and we can come to terms with the answer. Sometimes we make assumptions about what's happening. Maybe our own kids are treated well, so we don't look at how our neighbor girls are being treated. Maybe because our close circle of folks are working to do positive things, we feel good about that, but we don't reach out to find out how teens in general are being treated, boys or girls. Right? And then once we hear from them and understand from them what is going on in the community, then we can start to measure that up against two traditional teachings. Is that part of what has been going on? Is that part of multi-generationally the way we treated women in the past? Is there that kind of respect for the roles, the defined roles that women have had over the years? Or are we as boys or men assuming that our roles are more powerful? And again, there's no roles that are more or less important in our communities. They are all roles that need to be fulfilled so that our communities can move forward in a safe and healthy way. So we need to have the compassion to acknowledge positive change, right, and still have the willingness to encourage further growth and development. So, when we see somebody who's making positive change, we want to be able to acknowledge that. We want to have the compassion to be able to say to them, yes, okay, I see that you're trying to make positive change here. But just because somebody is making attempting to make positive change doesn't mean that along the way we don't still have the willingness to encourage further growth and development. Stopping a negative behavior is positive, but it's not positive enough. Stopping the behavior is one thing. Being able to articulate or talk about the effects of that behavior on ourselves, on the people we are victimizing, on our community as a whole, on those people that we interact with on a regular basis, learning what the effects of that behavior is. Humor can be very painful. You can get a short-term benefit of a laugh from your cohorts, a laugh from your community members, a laugh from your buddies and your friends that you're hanging out with. But that humor might have left a lasting scar on somebody else. So then it's important for us to be able to go back and articulate what the effects of the behavior is. So if I was to say to someone that I was close to that, okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to stop that behavior. Well, once I've said that, I've just reminded them about the past behavior, and it doesn't really go very far. Apologies are more about the self than the other. It's usually about, I'm going to apologize so that I can feel better, we can move forward. But it's not an acknowledgement about what the behavior was. So we want to do something further than just stopping behavior. We want to be able to encourage youth to be able to understand what the effects of their behavior is on others. And nowadays, with what youth have to face with all the social media stuff, it has a huge impact on how they operate in their world. Right? All it takes is a few negative quotes on Facebook or some other social media platform, and rumors get spread, and people start reacting to statements made when they don't have a lot of information about what really happened. Right? Sometimes other people think it's funny, and they just kind of pile on that kind of examples, and then if people try to hold somebody accountable, then they get ganged up on. So this cyberbullying that happens, this spreading of rumors on social platforms, it's not a cute, fun thing, right? So just stopping that kind of behavior isn't enough. You have to be willing to, kids nowadays have to learn that they need to go back and say that the behavior was inappropriate, that I understand that when I do that, that causes problems for you. And we all know about the high rates of suicide in our communities by teens, so I think it's particularly important. So highlight the opportunities young men and teens have, that boys have, and girls for that matter as well. The opportunities as parents, teachers, coaches, peers, role models, leaders, that these are all roles that can happen with teens. We can engage them in being coaches and teachers of things that are happening in our community. We can engage them in being community leaders. We can and community leaders, that we can encourage them to be part of the process early, and not just wait for them to come to us, but seek out their opinions, seek out their energy, so that we can get them involved early. And the earlier they're involved in these kind of social issues, the longer they'll be involved with them later in life. It will not only influence how they treat their partners and their children in the future, but it'll encourage other community members to do the same. So we'd like to provide opportunities for youth and men to be involved in public actions. And even if they're adult events, there is lots of things that youth can do to be involved, so that they can feel like they're important members in the community, that they're part of the initiative. All roles are important. I think about a time when there was a Take Back the Night rally. And that was an initiative that happens in many communities where people are talking about we want there to be an increased level of safety in our communities, and especially in the evenings, that people should be able to walk home. Women and girls should be able to walk around, walk home, be engaged in public, and not have to feel fear for the darkness. So there was a Take Back the Night march, and there was a group of young men that said, well, you know, we want to lead the march. We want to show everybody that we as young men can take a stand, that we can voice our opinions. And so we want to be right out there in the front so that everybody can see that this is not just a woman's issue, that there's men involved as well. And they were sent to me because the women who were running the event said, look, you know, this is a bunch of women getting together to talk about we want to take back the night. Yes, there's lots you can do, but marching at the front is not what we're looking for. So they came to me, and they thought, the young men said to me that, well, you know, we're coming to you because we figured that you could, and they were sent to me because everybody thought that, well, we could resolve this dilemma. And I said, well, why do you need to march in the front? Well, we want to show everybody how enthusiastic we are about this issue, how much we support this issue. I said, are there other ways that you can do that? And they said, well, I guess we could march as a group further back or at the end, or we could disperse ourselves amongst the women. And I said, well, I got a great way for you to show that you are sincere about your efforts. What's that? Don't march. And they were in shock. What do you mean don't march? We want to show our support. I said, well, then here's something that you can do. You can provide child care and youth activities while the march is going on so that more women could be out there marching. And they thought about it for a while, and then they engaged in that, and they had a great time. They did a great job of watching the younger children, of providing opportunities for them. We said, look, as long as it's a healthy activity you get to choose. They came up with all kinds of activities for these kids to be involved in. At the end of the day, they increased the level of respect for themselves. Women who didn't even know about the original controversy were just, you know, praising them for standing up and taking a stand and being involved, right? And if they would have just marched, yes, some people would have saw them, but that's about self, and that's not about others or community. So they had an opportunity then to show that, look, we are true community members. We are truly engaged in these issues. We can make a positive change. And we can do that by being directly involved in this issue, whether or not we're visible out in the front of the march or not. So the march went well. The activities for the younger kids went well. These teens, these young men, they increased their level of esteem for themselves and by other community members. So there are opportunities, there are initiatives where we can engage youth, where we can get them involved. And when they get that kind of social interactive response for the praise for being involved in it, it encourages them to go on to be further involved in these issues. And it increases the level of safety and autonomy for all involved, and increases the level of health and wellness for our whole community. So the more teen boys are visible being involved, the more it encourages other boys, and the message gets out that they have a stake in ending violence against teen girls. Right? And again, the more boys that are involved, then the more other boys want to be involved. They start to understand the issue, and then it's not just for the moment. It's not just for while they're teens dating. It is also for the future. It is also for how they interact in their relationships whether it's an interpersonal relationship or if it's a social relationship, some kind of job that they have or some kind of other thing that they're involved in where they're actually listening and not just getting ready to speak. And so what I mean by that is there's so many times when we're talking with somebody and you can tell that they're just waiting for my lips to stop so that they can respond to something I said earlier on, which means they didn't really hear the whole gist of what I was saying. They're just responding to the first thing. So when you see that, there's another way to communicate, that it's important to actually hear, not just listen, right? That we want to give people an opportunity to use their voices, and we want to respect their voices. And the more that we do that, then the more that encourages others to do the same. So when men and young boys become allies to advocates, we can restore a sense of honor to our community and ourselves. It's really important that we look at this piece as youth, as young men being allies to the whole advocacy movement. It's not about usurping the power that advocates have. It's about how we become allies to them, that we can step out of the shadows of shame we and our brothers have created and walk with pride for working to make our communities healthier and safer for all, for girls and boys and women and men, this generation and future generation. This is a quote from a friend of mine, Jack Laird, who has passed away a couple of years ago. But this is the work that we were trying to do together with youth and with adult men, is trying to restore this sense of honor, making youth feel like it's an honorable thing to be able to treat our fellow community members. If we're going to talk about sovereignty for our nations, that we also have to talk about sovereignty for the women in our communities, young women as well as older women. That we want to engage them now so that they will be community leaders that in the future that have a grounding in what the effects of the violence is. And that happens by making them more, creating opportunities for them to be more involved in the issues at an earlier time, and giving them praise for that, de-emphasizing some of the other behaviors, overemphasizing the positive changes that they're trying to instill in others. And again, I'm wanting to be sure to leave time for questions, comments, or concerns. Important for us to understand that we are all related. Our actions, whether they're positive or negative, affect the whole community, and we can work together to make a difference on this issue. And working together means engaging youth, coming up with initiatives for them to be involved in. Whenever we have a public event, one of the first things that we can do is think about, well, how can we have youth assist us in this? How can we have them working alongside with us? I don't care if it's a public awareness campaign or if it's a community event. How do we get them involved? We can have them be the ones who design the posters. There's been many communities where I've seen at the beginning of the border for the reservation, when you're driving in, there'll be signs posted about physical or sexual violence. You go into community social service organizations, you see posters on the wall. Well, we can have kids, we can have youth involved in creating those kinds of media things. There is an example of a number of years back where, as adults, we were trying to come up with radio ads, and the group got split up, and the youth they kind of got sent away to another room. And when they were sent away to the other room, the adults were thinking, okay, now we can get down to business. And so then the adults started to work on these public awareness radio ads. And, for a few hours, people were struggling with wordsmithing everything that they said and debates back and forth about what and how things should be said. By the end of the afternoon, we get the two groups back together again, and there was like a half a dozen or more complete radio ads that these teens had done. And there was one or two that the adults had done, because the adults were so busy wordsmithing and making sure that, that their ideas got put down, that they weren't just thinking about putting out products. And with the kids, it was with the youngsters, with these teens. These kids were between 10 and 20 years old. They came up with complete public awareness things that got used on the radio in the same amount of time. So sometimes we devalue or undervalue youth, when those are the ones that we should exactly be looking to help encourage to do the work. So when we work together on something like that, we can make a difference, and that difference affects the whole community. It affects how teens interact with each other. It affects how teens interact with adults. And it has the possibility to change how adults interact with teens. They're not just seen as some menace or some bothersome group of kids that are hanging around causing trouble. Just because youth are together doesn't mean that they're causing problems. Sometimes there's very positive things that happen. There was another community that I was in where there was no place for youth to hang out. And the youth were given the opportunity to clean up this one lot, with the caveat that if they cleaned up this lot, they would be able to use it for their own purpose. And they cleaned it up. They made they set up a system where they all donated food. All the teens brought food, and they fed anybody who came and helped. So they were preparing food for those who came and helped. The youth were working together to clean up this lot, and at the end they made a little skateboard park out of it and had a place where they could hang out. They eventually had a place there where they had Wi-Fi access, so kids who didn't want to do the athletic kinds of things could sit there and cruise the internet or do their social media stuff. It was a really positive thing for the whole community. And it was basically put together by youth who were being respected and were being asked to be part of the solution of cleaning up this lot. Well, they did a wonderful job of it, and it was all because people reached out to them in the first place. So I was speeding through this. I was wanting to save time for questions, comments, concerns at the end, so I don't know, Lynette, if you have something that you would like to add or like to have me expand on, or if there's are any questions or comments that we want to deal with at this point. I'm not seeing questions or comments from either. At a loss at this point. I don't know if I'm just supposed to end or if there's a way for me to accept questions. Okay.
So yeah, Don, people can chat in the box if they have questions. And then if they don't, you can go ahead and end it.
Well, I do want to say that I thank those of you who did sign into the webinar. I think this is a huge issue in our community. We oftentimes discount the efforts of youth or don't include them in the first place, and that it is important for us to do that. This is the future leaders of our community, and if we want there to be healthy relationships in our communities, that we have to start with asking youth, finding out what's going on, and finding out how we can assist them so that they can assist us. And if we don't do that, then the problem just kind of festers. So I thank all of you that were part of the webinar today. I want to thank both the facilitators who are doing the technical assistance part, particularly Lynette Tala, who has been instrumental in encouraging me to put this information down so it can be put in a webinar focus. I would say that people can feel free to contact either Redwind themselves or myself personally. I believe my contact information is there, so I can be contacted either on the internet or on my cell phone, and I'd be honored to entertain any questions, comments, or concerns. So at that point, I guess that we would just leave it up to those to either contact Redwind or myself, and I thank you all for allowing me to speak with you today.
So Don, you do have a question from Dallas. Do you see that in the chat box?
Do I have examples of the activities that have or are done to engage young men? Yes, I think that, again, I think that whenever there's an event that we go those few that we have and say, do you want to be involved in this event? How can you be involved? How can we make this event more youth or teen friendly? I mean, most of the fundraisers and other social media events are kind of geared towards the adults when even if it's an issue about teens. We see workshops that are geared towards service providers working with teens. So one of the things that we can do is do workshops. Now, I'm not talking about just going into schools. I'm talking about putting on workshops and events that kids can that young men, young girls can be involved in, that they can be the presenters. So one of the things we do is we find some folks that are kind of involved, and we take them under our wing, once they have a basic understanding of what we're trying to do, then we let them do some of the presenting, that they be involved in it. So it's not just adults talking down to youth, that it is adults and youth speaking together.
So Maud, there's a file box above the chat box where you can download a copy of the PowerPoint. It'll say like name and then size, the 6, 7, 16 engaging young boys. Size is like 715 kilobytes where you can download it. And we don't do certificates of attendance. We're unable to do that right now.
Okay, well, thank you all. And again, webinars are kind of an odd thing, so I really do encourage people, if you want to continue the conversation, Lynette has had an extensive history of working with youth. She's very knowledgeable about these issues, so contacting Redwind and talking to her could be helpful. There may be ways in which she can assist you. And then for myself, I would say again, please feel free to either contact me by email or on my cell phone. Just reference that you were part of the webinar, you were listening to part of the webinar and you wanted more information. And again, I'm on the northwest coast, so you just have to remember that time frame. But if you try to get a hold of me and I don't get back to you right away, just make sure that you leave a well-articulated email address or telephone number and a time where it may be appropriate for me to get back to you. So again, Miigwech, I thank you all, and good luck with your work. And I guess at this point, I'll just sign off.